Welcome to this particular session on ransomware. It's just getting worse. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the executive editor with My Security Media, and this is with a session with ESET. And welcome Tony Anscombe there in California, the Chief Security Evangelist with ESET. Tony, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be back and talking to you, Chris.
Very good. And welcome to those attendees. And given that we're obviously strong Australia focused, but Asia Pacific, you're welcome to say good day. Let us know where you're listening from. Tony, well, you may have seen Tony. He's doing weekly briefing sessions with ESET as well. And as I mentioned, the Chief Security Evangelist. So if you want to reach out to Tony, please do so. And we've also had Tony on our Cybersecurity Weekly podcast as well. So Tony, what I'm going to do is I'll hand over to you. We'll get straight into it. And for the audience that are just joining us, this is a recorded session and your questions are welcome. Just use the Q&A and you're very welcome to fire questions in and I'll moderate that. And Tony, likewise, if I see anything topical there, I'll certainly come in as well. But you've got a very interesting presentation here and quite in-depth, and we'll also be touching on the dark web. So if you want to share your screen now and take over, you should be able to.
Firstly, thank you for the great introduction. And that was absolutely a real thing. If you want to reach out and you've got questions after the presentation, please feel free to do so. Happy to have discussions anytime. So when we look at ransomware, I think there's lots of discussions around cybersecurity and stuff like that, but I think a good place to start with ransomware is it's a business, and understanding that there is a business that's running in effect in parallel to your business and our business, but the business that's running is a criminal business. And I think that's super important to understand and to appreciate, because then if you put yourself in the shoes of the cyber criminal for a moment, then maybe it's easier to understand how this is just not going to go away, and probably it's going to get worse. And I want to step back slightly to 2018 and give you kind of how we got to where we're at now and why we're seeing such huge ransomware demands and why ransomware is so prevalent. So if I go back to 2018, which is only 2-3 years ago, Dr. Michael Maguire gave a presentation at RSA, the security conference held in San Francisco. And at that security conference, he released an entire paper on the web of profit and understanding the growth in the cybercrime economy. And it was kind of groundbreaking at that moment in time. And because what he'd done is he'd looked at the cost of cybercrime to businesses, and he estimated it to be $1.5 trillion annually, which at that point in time seemed huge. I mean, how can the world be, funding cybercrime or having a cost in this way of cybercrime? And it was super interesting, his report, because he also then broke down what the different individual parts of cybercrime were causing, and for example, what cyber criminals might be earning. And that ranged from everything from an entry-level cyber criminal, so right down at the bottom, who may be creating phishing campaigns or something like that, at $42,000 to $45,000, and I say that in US dollars because that's where the presentation was given, all the way up to several million. And the mid-range there, so somebody in that mid-packet was earning about $900,000, and that's his estimate. Now, to put that in perspective, the president of the US earns $900,000. So a mid-range cyber criminal was potentially earning the same as the US president. And that was one of the headlines at that moment in time. And it was super interesting, but where did it go from there? Well, in last year, the World Economic Forum, in their global risk report, took another look at the cost of cybercrime to big businesses, and they estimated that it was now $6 trillion. So a fourfold increase in 2 years. Now, a 4x increase like that is just huge. And if we were all in the same room, I'd be looking around the room now, looking you in the eye and turning around saying, has your business increased by 4x in the last 2 years? And I very, very much doubt anybody in the room would be putting their hand up and turning around and saying, yeah, absolutely, we've seen an increase like that. And I think that puts this in perspective of where we actually are. So what does ransomware actually mean? Well, if you Google ransomware, the definition of ransomware, this is what it comes up with. Yeah, ransomware is illegal computer software that stops the computer from working or prevents you getting information until you've paid money. I think we could have all pretty much understood that. However, I'm going to challenge that meaning, and let me tell you why I'm going to challenge that meaning, because I think it needs to change. In fact, I think it has changed from this particular meaning, that this definition that you see online. So where did it all start? Well, this is not new, and that's the important thing that we need to understand. This started back in 1989 with the AIDS Trojan, which was encrypting, and let's just say, I think the best way to think of this, it was encrypting the directory structure. It was scrambling the directory structure on disks. And you could apparently send some money and they would tell you how to unencrypt them. I think the likelihood of getting anything unencrypted was pretty low, especially seeing that they were after you sending them a check to a PO box in Panama. So highly unlikely that you were ever going to get this fixed. And where did it go from here? We've seen various forms of ransomware over time. So if we think about that, you've seen the early versions that were then locking a device. So a lock screen appeared on the Windows desktop and it locked the device. It then became a little bit harder with a law enforcement locked screen telling you the FBI or whatever law enforcement is in your area, and telling you that you needed to pay to unlock it because they were going to report you, or that it's been locked by law enforcement and you need to pay to unlock it, or whatever the message was at the time. Then it got more extreme and they started displaying porn on the screen. So now your motivation to pay is somewhat different because you want the image off of your screen. You want to get rid of this. And then it shifted across into mobile operating systems as well. So for example, Android, and then you've got payment through premium rate SMS messages. And then we've seen what we all think of ransomware today, the encryption of data and the locking out of our own systems. So this path has been quite varied along the way. And all the way there from that AIDS Trojan back in 1989 and a payment by check to a PO box. But where does it live if we pick up where that 1.5 trillion number came from with Dr. Michael Maguire? What happened in 2018? Well, I think one of the most noticeable ones for me was the smart city servers of the District of Atlanta, well, the state of Atlanta, state of Georgia, sorry, the city of Atlanta were infected with ransomware. And they were locked out of their servers. Now, the ransomware demand on the city by the attacker was $51,000 in Bitcoin. Now, if somebody asked you for $51,000 today, or if you heard of a ransom of $51,000 today on a municipality that's serving that many people, or a company that's got the similar budgets to the city of Atlanta, I think we'd all turn and say, well, the company should just pay. But personally, I would say they shouldn't pay, and we'll come back to that. But at that point in time, this was a big ransom, and the city of Atlanta made a very conscious decision not to pay. And they then, being a public organization, have published what it's cost them since. And I'm going to give you a couple of other examples of public organizations as well in this example, because I think these are super important of understanding the story of how we get to where we are today. So the initial estimates at the time of the attack were that it would cost the city of Atlanta $2.7 million to rebuild their systems and recover from this cyber attack. And that was the estimates of the experts involved at the time. Well, if we skip a year to 18 months on, and then we go back and look to see what it actually did cost Atlanta, it cost them, in fact, there's two numbers that get used broadly. 17 million is a number that is commonly used. And that was broken down 11 million in new hardware and 6 million in software and services. And then I happened to sit through a presentation at DEF CON actually this year, Black Hat DEF CON this year, where somebody that was involved in the restructuring said actually the number is probably around 20 to 25 million, but 10 million of that was additional hardware and software that wasn't actually replacements, but they were improving their security and improving their systems. So I think that 15 million number is probably the average number in here. And I think this is a significant point in time, because now you have to think about, you go into 2019, 2020, and the examples I'm going to show you in a moment, this particular incident might help explain what happened then. Now, to give you some other stakes in the ground at that moment in time as well, you had WannaCry in 2017, so slightly just before this, and the NHS in the UK estimated the cost of WannaCry on their systems, so to recover their systems and to be operational again, was approximately $121 million. And you also had Norsk Hydro at $59 million in 2019. So we've got some good examples of people that didn't pay and how much it's cost them not to pay. And then if we shift on to 2019, we had two examples actually in Florida. There were two municipalities in Florida that both paid their ransom. And this kind of made international news because this is large sums of money going to a cyber criminal, or it certainly was in 2019. Yeah, Riviera Beach paid 600,000 and Lake City paid 500,000. And these were within 2 or 3 weeks of each other. Now you have to think, if you were the chief executive or the mayor of that city, and you're sitting there and all your systems are locked, and I forget which one of these, but basically they reverted completely back to a manual process of paper and doing things manually. In fact, I think that was Lake City. Now, interestingly, the city servers and the public safety systems had two different security systems in place. So this was the city servers that were taken out, not the public safety ones. But if you were the mayor of that city, you'd be looking at that and you would look across at your neighbor slightly in Georgia and turn and say, well, the city of Atlanta, it cost them, $15 million, anywhere between 12 and $15 million to rebuild those systems. So do I pay? And at that stage, I think it would be a compelling argument to pay, because do you go back to your electorate and turn around and say, actually, we're going to have to increase taxes to pay this ransom, or we could pay, or not to pay this ransom, or we could just pay the ransom out of a small budget. And I think that's the situation that may have been, to my mind, is probably the turning point of why people started paying bigger amounts of money, is those public incidents. And then if we shift on to 2020, the University of California, now this one, I'm not sure on the data that was actually encrypted. It could have been public health data, because this was UCSF, so a university actually close to where I live. They had a ransomware attack in the middle of the pandemic. They are a medical teaching hospital university, so it could have been medical data, it could have been public health data that was encrypted, and the requirement to get it back, the motivation to get it back, may have been very different. But what they did is they then published all the communications that went backwards and back and forth to the cyber criminal. So the IT staff unplugged the computers to stop the malware spreading, and the hackers then demanded $3 million. The university went back and turned around and said, we'll pay $780,000. And then it went back and forth slightly. So the university upped their offer to 1.02. The criminals refused and said 1.5, and they settled actually on $1.14 million. So it's interesting to see how this was a business negotiation. Now remember, the business of cybercrime, that's what I said right at the start, is this is a business. So these cyber criminals were in negotiation of unlocking this encrypted data for UCSF. And it's interesting to see how actually this went back and forth. And what is it that ransomware gangs are doing? Well, it's twofold. There's several things in here, and we'll get into how the attacks have changed in a moment. But there's data encryption, and I think we all understand that piece. Somebody comes in, encrypts all the data, bang, you've lost access, and suddenly you've got problems. But there's also this extortion, and this is where the attack has changed slightly. So if you look at how it's changed before the data is encrypted, there's extortion. So somebody's taking a copy of that data out of the organization, and they're holding that data out on the dark web, which we will come back to come and look at in just a moment. Now, think about this as a company. One of the motivations here may actually be being pressured not to fall foul of privacy legislation. Because if your data has been taken and it gets then put on a public server, you're going to have a privacy regulator coming down and possibly fining the business for not having the right cyber security in place, or potentially being part of a data breach. So you've got this extra pressure now being leveraged by the cyber criminal, because they know that you're not going to want to go and actually own up to a data commissioner or whatever it is that you've got in your region, where you'd have to go and report that there's been a data breach. So it's a double extortion. You've got this lockout of your systems and potentially being reported to the authorities. And what does it look like? Well, they will put parts of the data online. This is a dark website where somebody's data has been published, and then this particular instance, it's one particular ransomware group who focus on university, schools, and educational institutions, etc. So if you refuse to pay, you're going to see this type of thing on a website proving they've already got the data and it's out. They can publish it if they want to. Now, also this is one of the instances that I think is super interesting, because I think, again, this is maybe slightly part of a change in attitude. Blackboard, who have an awful lot of software in the education market. So, for example, they run systems that run school operations, the donor systems. I say donor, I mean actually people making donations to schools. So they run a lot of the back-end cloud services for a lot of educational establishments, and they've got offices all over the world: North America, London, Sydney, and they were the unfortunate victim of a cyber attack. And that cyber attack was fortunately and successfully stopped by law enforcement and their internal cybersecurity team. So that's good news. And that is absolutely very good news. Now, there was, to give you some indication of how big this company is, they're about, in Australian dollars, it's about 1.28 billion in revenue. So this is a big company. And they've got 170 health organizations using their software, and about 20 or so universities. So there's a lot of data involved in this. But they stopped the attack, but it didn't stop the ransom, because the cyber criminal terrorist said, that's fine, but if you don't want me to publish the data I've already exfiltrated from your servers, then you need to pay me. And Blackboard paid. Now, we don't know how much they paid, but it shows that at the point where this is nearly like plan B for a cyber criminal. So you've got plan A of, I will get in, I will encrypt the data, lock you out of your systems. You'll probably pay to get access back. But if you don't pay, or you manage to stop my attack, and I've already stealthily taken the data out of your network and stored it somewhere else, you're going to pay me anyway. And that's exactly what happened in this particular instance. And last year, in August 2020, we saw the Australian Information and Privacy Commissioner say exactly that. And in actually saying that the exfiltration of data was becoming more prevalent, they released some very interesting data that ransomware was rising by 33% in the first half of 2020 from 13. And they looked at human error. So what was causing data breaches in May? And human error was accounting for 39% of notifications in May of last year, compared to an average of 34% overall. So, malicious actors are clearly using human error. They're using what are, I would say, the traditional ways of doing this, of phishing, credential theft, etc., of all the ways that we know we're being attacked, which is why cybersecurity awareness training actually is super important. But they're also it doesn't stop with just the encryption and the extortion. Once they've done that, there is a process in place. This is a business campaign that a ransomware criminal is running. They're print bombing, so they'll start churning out the ransomware demands on all the printers that are attached to the network. They start automating robot cold calls to the call center of the company as well. What that does is it actually stops you talking to your customers. If I lock your phone lines, you can't be talking to your customers, or your customers can't be calling in. So you're locking that extra piece of business, or creating a denial of service attack against public servers, where, of course, people may be going to get information of why they can't get hold of the business or transact or interact with the business in any way. So there's pressure-inducing tactics as well being placed on companies. And if we look, this is not just this is not specific to any one region. There's great examples across Australia. I'm pleased to say most Australian companies don't pay, and I'm certainly with that. I think that's a good thing. But in March 2020, you had 9 disruption to the broadcast, and it's a free-to-air broadcaster, as you guys already know. Then you had JBS, the food company. Of course, that was a global attack, and JBS actually did pay $11 million, but that was 47 different plants were stopped in Australia during that attack. Uniting Care, April 2021, healthcare provider. That was a 2-month-long ordeal, unfortunately, and approximately 20%, and I think this is a relatively global number. 20% of data breaches are on healthcare services, and in fact, I've just read about another one here close to where I live today. So it doesn't let up. And then if we look at the changing cost of ransomware, well, when Colonial Pipeline got taken out earlier in this year, and it was a $4.4 million payment, I think everybody thought that seemed like a lot of money, and it's certainly a lot of money from that $51,000 that was asked of the City of Atlanta back in 2018. But it was paid, and the significance of this payment, 45% of the east coast of the US, their petrol supply comes from Colonial Pipeline, and there was 100 gigabytes of data exfiltrated from their systems. So, right or wrong to pay? Well, to me, definitely wrong. But there's some other examples here. JBS, I've already just mentioned. Garmin reportedly paid $10 million. Kaseya didn't pay. That demand was $70 million. Now, it's a slightly differing attack, because the Kaseya attack was a supply chain attack, where the cyber criminal managed to get into a piece of software that was then being distributed across a much wider network, which then affected thousands of companies, as I'm sure you read in the media at the time. They didn't pay, and they did recover. And there was a lot of work with law enforcement. And I'm unsure they did get the encryption key. I'm unsure. I don't think it's ever been disclosed where that encryption key actually come from. And the one that seems to have snuck under the radar here is actually a company, CNA Financial. And I say that because it didn't seem to get picked up a lot in the press. Now, interestingly, this is also a company that provides cyber risk insurance as one of their services, and they paid $40 million. So they actually handed over $40 million. And like I say, that one seems to have snuck under the radar slightly. But if you think now from 2018 and that point in time where I'm saying that those issues in the public domain, where you can see what it costs companies, if you were a company in this predicament and you looked back at companies and how much it was costing them, then maybe that's the reason why some of these companies are actually paying, because they can see it's going to cost them a lot more over the longer term. But the problem is of course, once you've paid, there's a propensity to come back and be attacked again. And that is seen on a frequent basis. that cyber criminals will look for weaknesses in the same network and attack people that have already paid. So what does it mean? Well, ransomware, I think that meaning has changed. I think actually somewhere in that meaning, it needs to add the word data breach, because it's no longer about stopping somebody accessing their systems. It's a lot more than that. And you might be sat there in a small company. And if you are, you're thinking, well, maybe this doesn't affect me. What this guy is talking about is all enterprises and big business. Well, this was a company, I always use an example. It's a small family-run company in the US. They got hit with ransomware. They were a telemarketing company providing call center type services to people, and they got hit with ransomware. And unfortunately, they couldn't recover. They spent 3 months trying to recover their systems and services. They ran out of money. They ran out of, I'd say, motivation and effort, really. And they closed down and left 300 people without jobs. My point here is there's lots of examples, smaller businesses. It's more devastating sometimes when it hits a smaller business because they don't have the experts on hand. They don't have the resources available to actually recover. And they may not have had the processes and the procedures in place to actually deal with it correctly. So it can actually be more devastating. So if you're in a smaller company, or even if you're in a small school or anything like that, don't think you're not going to be the victim, because unfortunately you will. Or could be, sorry, not will, could be. Is ransomware a business? Yes. Now, one thing we continually hear about are these ransomware gangs in certain parts of the world. That's right, there are clever people that have created software, ransomware software, and let's be clear, they are exceptionally clever coders, because they create this software and they create the back-end service that runs it. And when I say back-end service, so that's the exfiltration of data, the campaign of negotiation. This is an entire software service that they've built. But these are not the people that actually come and attack you. The attacker is somebody else. They're the reseller or the affiliate of these ransomware gangs. And those affiliates could be local, they could be somewhere else in the world. And these affiliates are the people that are running the phishing campaigns, getting the credentials, breaking into networks, etc., and actually running the part that is attacking somebody. And then once they're in, once they've got their in, whether that's through a vulnerability, through, in somebody's network or credentials or whatever, however it is they may have got in, they then are deploying somebody else's back-end service. Now, the important, I think, of understanding that this ransomware as a service is what's behind the attacker. And then it's the ransomware as a service that we're hearing in the media. Oh, this is another for this particular group. In my example here is REVIL, who we hear shut down, and then I think they've reappeared again recently. Even if a group shuts down, the resellers and the affiliates will go to the next group. It won't stop, closing down one particular group won't stop the people that are actually doing the attacks. They will just take their business, pick up the business, and take it to another group. And there are other groups in the sideline, in the wings, so to speak, that will pick up that business. It's a commoditized business to a certain degree. They run call centers, they run support lines for their affiliates. So this is very, very much a business. And what are they making? Well, one of the representatives of REVIL claimed that they've made $100 million in Q4 of last year. This is what I want. This was for 2020. And another group turned around and said they made $150 million. Now, just taking that first $100 million number, that means the ransoms were probably somewhere in the region of $300 to $500 million, because you've got to take out the percentage that the ransomware as a service group are getting and the money then that the affiliate's getting, who's getting the lion's share of that cash for actually causing the attack and getting into the network, exfiltrating the data and then using the service behind them. So this is big business. It's potentially a $500 million business for REVIL, and that was in 2020. And how has that change in attack happen? Well, you've got the gaining initial access, things like remote RDP, so remote desktop protocol, something that's on pretty much every Windows Windows machine out there, the ability that you can remotely connect to a desktop somewhere else. Most businesses fortunately disable a lot of this. A lot of businesses, as we know, don't either. And it allows you access to your office machine with as little as just a username and password. And if that password is not strong enough, it opens up the opportunity to the attacker, unfortunately. And in fact, just recently, I was in a local school to where I live and talking to a member of their staff. And I should ask them the simple question: when was the last time you were forced to change a password? And it turns out they'd never changed their password since they joined the school 5 years ago. So something like that, I can guarantee they've reused that password in other systems, probably part of a data breach there, gives an attacker access into an RDP connection on their machine, and off the attacker goes. An RDP, well, what does it look like? It gives you exactly what you'd expect, that desktop. And what does it look like? So we've been monitoring RDP. Anybody that's following the ESET threat reports, you'll have seen that we've published some numbers back in for last year, 2020, and into the start of this year. If we look at RDP attacks in 2020, and this is just our telemetry, remember, so what we're seeing of people failed attacks against infrastructure that's protected by our software. We've seen 29 billion attack attempts over 770,000 unique clients. Now, we do the math on that. That's 37.7 thousand attacks per client. So you can see this is a hugely, hugely prevalent attack opportunity for a cyber criminal. And if you then play that out over the kind of pandemic year, so to speak, and of course RDP was important at that moment in time because everybody was working from home, and I know you guys in Australia are still in some form of lockdown, so RDP is probably still very important in Australia to a lot of companies, and certainly smaller businesses, I would have thought. But it's important to understand that these type of services are the gaining one of the paths that somebody can gain initial access. So what does it look like? The attack, that attack is gaining initial access. Then once they're in, they're going to look around and they're going to information gather, look for administrator passwords, other routes to other parts of the network. They're going to look around to see, they're going to draw a picture of the network, basically. They're going to map the network, look to see where things are stored, what might be sensitive, and they're going to move around on that network. And they're going to spend time. This attacker is not coming in. This is not one afternoon. They're going to spend time in that network, moving around internally and gathering information. And at some point, once they've realized what data is important to the company and what the company might pay for, then they're going to exfiltrate that data out onto a dark web service. And this is when that affiliate is then sitting back and using the ransomware as a service model and extracting that data into their service provider behind them. Then they're going to try and disable security systems, because if they've got admin passwords and such like, and they've got internal access, they're going to turn off whatever it is that they can, and then they'll execute their ransomware. So by this stage, to a certain degree, it's all over because they've already taken the data. So it's important that actually, the protection, that first part is super important. We'll come back to that in just a moment. What we are seeing, though, is the mass spread of ransomware drop. So if you look at here, the quarters of last year, actually the mass spread is dropping, and that's because it's becoming more targeted. And that's why, I stress on you, think of malware as a business. Think of these cyber criminals running actual businesses. I think they've got employees. I think they come to offices, or they certainly group together somehow and run as businesses. And think about what it is they're doing. They're distributing software, they're encrypting data, they've got storage facilities, they're encrypting data, they're collecting data as well from data breaches, and they're running support services. It sounds and feels exactly like a small software business. So changing kind of tact here, is it legal or ethical to pay? Now, certainly I'm firstly of the opinion, and to put this on the table, don't pay. If you're funding cybercrime, then it's not a good thing. But it's geographically dependent. Now, one thing that seems to be common across most jurisdictions is that actually you'd be in breach of sanctions lists. So there are territories, organizations, and people on sanctions lists. Now, I live in the US, and if you look at the US Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control, they run the sanction list, and some of the ransomware groups appear on this list. Well, what seems to fail is why some of those groups are on the list, you don't tend to hear of too many people actually being taken to task over it. However, I think that is slightly starting to change. So just last week, one of the cryptocurrency exchanges got a warning or some type of notice from the OFAC about their involvement in paying a ransom. So in some way, I think we might be seeing a shift, which I think is important to every country to stand up and take note, because this shift could cause retargeting of by the cyber criminal. Because one thing we know is they're running a business, and if suddenly somewhere stops paying, then they're just going to shift their business elsewhere. So and I think it's important to understand that. And then we've got, if you fail to make it illegal, so if you sit there and don't make it illegal, and I know in Australia you have the ransomware payments bill still sitting on the sidelines. I don't think it's become law, and I'm not sure where the status of it is. But if you don't make it illegal, at least even mandatory reporting of it, which is what that bill actually suggests, if you don't make it illegal and other countries start making it illegal, then you become more of a target, because basically companies still might be able to pay you. So actually, I think it's important that you're one of the first to step up and turn and say, actually, we're going to not allow people to pay in this way. And I mentioned the ransomware payments bill already. And I'm kind of curious to see how that all actually plays out over time.
At this stage, they're definitely talking about at least mandatory reporting that that demand has been made. Whether they make it illegal to pay is another thing, but certainly mandatory to report it.
Yes, and that's why I'm interested to see whether they will go that extra step. But like I say, I actually think it's a good thing. So I know the opinion. You can find people with opinion in both directions on this particular issue. But I actually think if you step in really early and make it illegal to pay or difficult to pay, i.e. mandatory reporting will make it difficult for somebody to pay. Because bear in mind, at the mandatory reporting point, you might have to disclose you've had a data breach, and you're invoking that whole other machine that might come and look at you as a business. I think if you get in early, then you will be less of a target.
Yeah,
the cyber criminals are targeted. Yeah, they will take their business to where they're likely to get paid. So to pay, to pay or not to pay, well, that's the big question, isn't it? And to me, the answer is, by the way, the answer is not to pay, because, and I'm going to leverage back to Margaret Thatcher here from 1988. She famously at a party conference said, give in to the terrorists and you breed more terrorism. If we take the word terrorist out of this and put cyber criminal in there, if you pay the cyber criminal, you'll get more cybercrime. I mean, it's that simple, because you're funding them, you're resourcing them, and you're making it very profitable and giving them a lifestyle. So, it's an issue. It's an issue that needs to be grappled with. But to me, following the money, taking the money out of this is probably, to me, one of the only ways that actually you're going to fix it. Or fix it certainly long term for everyone. And look at the changing value of the ransom. I like this chart because the start of this chart was when Colonial Pipeline got attacked, and then Colonial Pipeline, of course, the FBI actually did recover some of the money. But if you then look at how cryptocurrency exchange collapsed in the month or so afterwards, I'm really hoping these cyber criminals didn't take their money out of Bitcoin, because what they gained from it halved in the space of a month. Huge issues with the cryptocurrency exchanges, and I don't know whether any of you are cryptocurrency investors, but even over the last week, I think I've seen it go up 10-15% and then down 20%. So this huge fluctuations. But it begs the question: should there be a mechanism of payment to cyber criminals, such as cryptocurrencies, allowed? And in my view, the answer should actually be no. I think there should be regulation around cryptocurrency. We shouldn't allow anonymized payments. And if we take the money out of this, I think it would be a very different case. And very quickly, I just want to talk about legislation and cybersecurity, because I think it's created real focus. So if we look at different pieces of legislation, as you can hear, I'm European originally. I live in California. You guys have Australia's Privacy Act. The US has the Consumer Privacy Protection. In fact, California has more strict legislation coming in of CPRA and currently has CCPA. The good thing about all this legislation, if you look at it all over the world where countries are now starting to legislate, and just recently China has put in strict privacy legislation around personal data in PIPL, what we're seeing is companies having to step up and secure the data. And it's putting the focus on cybersecurity. So when we talk about privacy, we're really talking about cybersecurity as well, because of the fines that get entailed around it and the need to protect it up front. But I think it also creates huge confusion, because different privacy legislation all around the world. This example here, a Chilean national who lives in California goes on holiday to Europe, and while they're in Europe, they purchase something from Australia or from New Zealand or wherever it might be, and whose privacy legislation actually applies? I think it's adding confusion. I think there needs to be a global standard. I think somehow we need to get, for example, we have the World Trade Organization, don't we? The rules between countries. I think privacy legislation needs the same global view. The internet is not in individual countries. One common thing you see is the word reasonable in all this legislation, reasonable security. And if you look at that, I won't go into too much detail here, but assessments of risk to the business, understanding of what reasonable security actually looks like, an action plan for compliance, timelines and milestones. So the importance is having a plan, excuse me, is having a plan and actually having a roadmap of what that looks like, because that's what a regulator will actually come and look for. And a crisis management plan. So proper configuration of protection of things like RDP, strong passwords and enforced policies, multi-factor authentication. I'll mention here that actually multi-factor authentication and the strong passwords have both been in the news in the last few days. I mean, you've seen Microsoft turn around and say they're moving to a passwordless environment and enforcing two-factor authentication as the primary mechanism to authenticate. And CISA, the Cyber Infrastructure and Security Agency in the US, turned around and said they believe passwords are no longer best practice. So what they're saying is it has to be two-factor authentication. But what else should we be doing? Well, cybersecurity guys saying, please go and update your software. That's quite unique, isn't it? And you should be doing good backups. More importantly, actually, from your backups, you should be doing restores. You should be able to make sure you should be able to recover from these from an incident and make sure your backups are working. And I'd actually say you need to run full scenarios. So have your policy, have your plan in place, but actually run a full scenario of of a pretend attack and a recovery from an attack to make sure your plan works. And employee training, I can't stress this enough. Human error, 70% of attacks, ransomware attacks, come from some type of human interaction. So employee training is so super important. And of course, I'm from ESET, multi-layered security solution, and you're welcome to reach out to me or any of the ESET team and talk to us about that. But a robust incident plan. Now, this has been really negative, and I like to put this slide in some of my presentations because I sometimes feel like a life insurance man telling you everything will be all right afterwards. Well, the internet's really pretty awesome. I'm sitting in California, you're sitting in Australia, our kids all remotely learn. We can phone our friends and family from wherever they are in the world. And to me, I think the internet is a really good place and it's good for you. Unless we should end on that positive note. So Chris.
Thank you very much. That was very, I was going to butt in a couple of times with some questions or some comments, but your flow was really, really good. And we do have time if you wanted to touch on a bit of the dark web, but I'll open it up to questions for the audience that are with us. Anything that you felt you wanted Tony to dive into. I think one thing it followed on from what we've been doing, Tony, is we just covered off on the ISACA report and the Australian Cybersecurity Centre Cybersecurity Threat Report as well. The reputation to companies is their number one concern. Hence, that's the motivation for companies to implement greater cybersecurity is reputation. Rather than the controls, rather than the data, it's about company reputation. And it does sound like that's been the motivator for paying ransom as well, to protect that reputation, to keep it quiet, maybe not even talk to the regulators, even worst case, but, you know, again, just an easy solution. Maybe if you balance off the business case between the potential losses, but there's still, so that was one thing I think that underlined that finding. The other one is not paying the ransom and how you might measure that business case as well. You kind of can only discover that through your incident response scenario training and having a look at your business continuity plans. Was there any other sort of sub cases that you could look at, like Kaseya not paying? They've kind of come out of it quite well in doing that as well. They've kind of, their reputation has almost been strengthened in a way, I would have thought.
Yes, now it is interesting though, because what you just mentioned, and if you look at the mandatory reporting potential, if you get the mandatory reporting, then if you run through the scenario today that somebody exfiltrates your data and you pay and you don't report it, and that data never becomes public, to me, the breach already happened, didn't it? Because somebody outside of your organization has got the data, and surely,
correct,
legally, I would have thought you're actually at liability to notify your customers that there has been a breach.
That's why you would pay, but that's why you would pay, so you don't have to notify, even though you're going to be breaching the law anyway, right?
Right, but you see my point is
Yes.
the data's already gone, Chris, so surely that was already the breach. To me, actually, you're breaking the law by not notifying your customers. So actually not paying should have the same action from you as paying, because you should have to tell your customer.
Yep. There's a question here from, sorry to interrupt, there's a question here. If you're not into paying ransom, what is your comment on cyber insurance, which covers ransomware payments? Should this be removed like what AXA has done?
Well, I think cyber insurance does play a role. I mean, there are certain instances where, you know, you might have, it depends whether it's against a cyber attack or whether you're insuring, for example, data and data centers and such like, and it depends what cyber insurance really means to people. But one thing I recently sat on a panel for a Canadian municipality that were talking to educators. And one of the schools had a ransomware attack, and he couldn't advocate enough that you need cyber risk insurance just to pay these people off. And it's like, that doesn't solve your issue. If you're not taking the serious demands about cybersecurity up front and actually securing your data and taking this seriously, cyber insurance is not the answer. And I think you're going to see a bit of a sea change here, because suddenly some of these cyber risk insurance companies are having to make huge payments.
And they're also being targeted as well. So you mentioned CNA. There's been one here in Asia Pacific, one up in Singapore was hit, and the ransomware gang said, yeah, we're going to target cyber insurance companies, and we want their client list because we know that they're going to be paying.
Right, exactly. And I think cyber insurance companies, though, are going to have to start policing the requirements of their policy. I think they've been pretty lax up to now of actually turning around and saying, well, we want to see your audit. We want to see your penetration test. We want to know you've got two-factor authentication. You know, I think the requirement hasn't been stringently policed. And I think cyber insurance companies are going to have to start stringently policing it. And I think you're going to see either premiums go up hugely, or the cost of actually having cyber insurance will go up because you're having to deploy more cyber security.
The other thing is, if it does become legislated, then the cyber insurance companies won't have a choice. They won't be paying to follow that legislation, and that will probably just make a lot of policies potentially void. If there's payments in that policy and becomes illegal, all of that will become irrelevant really over time, regardless of even the jurisdiction, because a cyber attack could occur, as you pointed out, in the privacy legislation. Same with the cyber insurance. If companies, multinationals, are operating in certain countries, then that could potentially put them at risk if they're paying ransom. Even if they're paying ransom in another jurisdiction, that data may touch those other jurisdictions and hence could become a bit of a minefield in terms of that as well.
Yeah, and I think you and I both know, Chris, that if you walk into some boardrooms, you're going to have the CFO and the CEO who's going to look across at the CISO and turn and say, "No, you can't have that budget. We've got cyber risk insurance."
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, that it's not helping, is it?
And I always think that's the first question the CISO would ask the board or the CEO is, how much are we prepared to pay, instead of in terms of whatever cybersecurity budget you might have. It's how much ransomware are you prepared to pay, and we'll work off sort of backtrack from that in terms of how much we're going to be forking out. Look, there was a couple of questions. Sorry, there was a couple of opportunities there, Tony. Did you want to cover off on the dark web? How long is that session? And welcome a show of hands if you want to touch on the dark web briefly with Tony. And any other questions? Tony, you've got 5 minutes if you've got?
Well, yeah, sure. So let me just put you back on screen share. If I can,
we're just going to cover off a little bit on the dark web, and this naturally relates to ransomware and both where they will be operating, but also where the data ends up as well, and some of that trading. And if there's any particular questions more on ransomware, but also on the dark web, welcome to fire that in. Go, Tony.
Now, I'm hoping you can see.
We can, yeah, that's good. We've got your contact details up.
Good. So let's. There's a couple of slides on the end of my presentation here, just in case anybody was particularly interested. What does all this look like if you go across to the dark web and you look to try and purchase, either get yourself a hacker or you try to purchase ransomware? So as you can see, this is a dark website where you can rent a hacker. They've got their resume, their CV listed on the dark web, and you can see roughly what you're going to have to pay them. And the process of actually collecting this is a much longer presentation that takes about 30 minutes, but I'm condensing it into like 2 minutes here for you. Is I ran I wondered how difficult it would be if you knew nothing, and that's where these slides came from. I went at this of, well, if I was a disgruntled employee and I wanted to get somebody to hack the company and I wanted to get some ransomware, how difficult would this really be for me? And as you can see, it wasn't actually very difficult to rent a hacker. Now, all the links that I took to get this information, I found in Popular Computer Press. Yeah, I won't name the publications, but they were in very specific publications that everybody could read. So there's screens like that, and then you get a ransomware as a service. So as you can see, this is a fairly commercial one, but amusingly, the disclaimer: our products are for educational purposes. I think that doesn't mean you go and attack schools with them. I think they're saying that they don't endorse using them against actual targets. But you can see here, darknet, command and control servers, you're getting the ransomware and you're getting the support services. So potentially, and they package these, and this is my point, is this looks and feels like a business. 12-month license, 6-month license, 1-month license. And it gets cheaper if you take 12 months up front, you're paying less money. And you can see, I could get a 1-month license here for $120. And it includes the decryptor, the encryptor, a support package, the real-time client manager, etc., a dashboard behind, so I can see where I am in my process. Yeah, and of course, payment is in Bitcoin, which is why I believe this needs regulating. Now, got my ransomware. I need somebody to attack. I can go buy some data. Just another place on the dark web. I can buy 100,000 US email addresses validated, so they're real. No passwords, but it means I can start spamming, create that campaign. Yeah, $9, 100,000 validated email addresses, validated to be real. What's frightening is the money is held in escrow until I confirm that actually the addresses are good. So there's honesty between this in the dark web, or this, of you think you're going to get ripped off if you pay somebody, well, you're not. If they've got passwords in the list, can I get them cracked? Yes, there's commercial services to get the passwords cracked. And this site, I think, brings it back to all of us. We all see PayPal phishing in our email every day. So I'm just going to show you here quickly of where that ends up. What happens to those phishing accounts? This is a dark web service where you can purchase people's PayPal accounts, the access to them. So you've given over the credentials accidentally in that phishing, yeah, and they are then selling access to the account that's been breached. And they can see the balance in the account, etc. And they're selling it for around about 10 to 15% of the value of the account. And frighteningly, if you've changed the password, so then your account is no longer breached, they'll refund you by giving you another account of similar value. So that's what I'm saying. This is very, very, very much run as a business. So that's the scary part and how simple it would be to do. That whole 30-minute presentation, which has got a whole lot more in depth on it, took me an hour to compile of actually getting to the point of being able to buy data, ransomware, and understanding how to run the campaign. I will say I obviously did not purchase any ransomware because that would be funding cybercrime.
Very good. And I think, again, if you've anyone who's been playing around in the dark web, be careful, but you do start to see the range of goods and services available there as well. But as you say, don't interact. You don't know who you're dealing with.
If you don't need to go there, don't go there, because you just get distracted on buying passport. You can buy passports and immigration vouchers and this, that, and the other.
Well, you can't travel now anyway, so there's no good having a false passport. Look, Tony, thank you so much for that. That was very in-depth, and I liked the various cases that you brought up, but also, as you say, the motivation there. And we have seen that significant rise since 2018. I think you're about right. And it will be interesting to see how the Bitcoin fall and how cryptocurrencies, that market, because that's my view, is that's been the real fuel there. That's allowed that payment to be made, and for them, they've made so much money. They now have established those. Maybe they'll take a holiday. I think REVIL's just come out of a holiday for some reason. There was a European holiday, right? So look, if there's no further questions from the audience, thank you so much for staying with us throughout that session. And as we've had up on the screen, Tony Anscombe, reach out to him on LinkedIn. Otherwise, it's at Tony@ESET is his Twitter feed. But otherwise, he is the Chief Security Evangelist for ESET. And thank you very much to ESET Australia for the support on this particular session, Tony. This will be available on demand on the Learn Security platform. Any closing comments, Tony?
Well, other than don't pay, and guys, stay safe
as best. But the internet's a good thing, so we'll take that away.
Absolutely.
Good man. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll enjoy the rest of our day. Thank you very much. Cheers later. Bye.